One very basic but helpful way to describe different cultures is to talk about hot climate and cold climate cultures. Now, I've taken that term from this book, Foreign to Familiar, written by Sarah Lanier, which is a very easy to read and short book about hot climate and cold climate cultures. And I recommend this book for maybe a Sunday school class, a mission group, or an international team to read chapters together and as a base for discussion. Now, a hot climate culture does not refer to weather, nor cold climate culture does not refer to cold-hearted people. Rather, people from hot climate cultures are seen as being more relational and community-oriented. And people from cold climate cultures, they value order and structure, even though they might think of themselves as being sociable. Very generally speaking, people from the global south, which would include the Middle East, the whole Asia world, Latin America, and Africa, these people would be seen as coming from hot climate or relational cultures. And then people growing up in the West, Caucasians from Europe and North America, these are people coming from cold climate cultures. So we have the blue cold climate and the red hot climate cultures. Let me explain this further by contrasting some values and behaviors between cold climate and hot climate cultures. In doing this, we are making generalizations, and I will mention that repeatedly. It does not mean that every person in their home culture would agree with all of these characteristics. But before I continue, just take a moment and ask these questions. What do you think is your culture? Are you from a hot climate culture or a cold climate culture? And then think of someone maybe in your team or in your church who might be coming from the other climate culture. As I talk about the differences between hot and cold climate cultures, please take note of these different illustrations that I'm going to be mentioning, and some may be of specific interest to you because they relate to what you're going through right now. And then at the end of today's lesson, I will ask you to discuss these differences with someone on your team. I want to go through about 10 different illustrations that show the difference between the cold climate and hot climate cultures, or as we see the blue and the red group categories. Now I get that from this book, East Meets West by Yang Liu, and it's a fascinating little book without any words, well, just a few little words on top, but each page has a contrast between the cold climate or the blue culture and the hot climate, the red culture. Now the colors are just arbitrary colors. I would say that the major difference between a hot climate and cold climate culture is that in hot cultures, people emphasize the community, the group. The extended family is more important than the individual. And I'm going to do a total lesson on this. But just for now, just, to say, for example, people from a cold climate culture, they wonder, why do so many people from a hot climate culture live together in one house? How do they survive? Where's their privacy and the rights of all the individuals? Now, the people from the hot climate culture, they look at this large house and one person lives in that large house, or two people. How do they survive living there all by themselves? You see, the values are so different. How about speech? Why and how do we speak to each other? Is it to transfer facts and provide correct information? Or is it to feel good as we talk? Or is it both? Hot cultures want to make sure that when we talk, we feel good. While direct cultures would say we've got to make sure we communicate correct facts. In cold climate cultures, the boss or teacher can be seen as a friend, someone you relate to. But in a hot climate culture, generally speaking again, the boss is really the boss, the person on the top. Students in hot climate cultures will stand up. For example, when a teacher comes in, they'll be hesitant to ask teacher questions, while in cold climate cultures, a student is normally friendly with a teacher and wouldn't be afraid to even challenge the teacher. What we share with others is expressed very differently in different cultures. How open are you with your feelings? Do you share what you think? How much do you express your emotions? If you're upset, do you let others know that you're upset? It's interesting in hot climate cultures where people are together a lot, they will not as easily share their emotions and inner thoughts with others. While people in cold climate cultures will much easier wear their feelings on their sleeves, so to speak. Family life is one of the major differences between the West and the global South. And again, that's a huge generalization because family life is very different in many different cultures in the global South. Now, I'm going to do a whole lesson on family life, but it's just to remember how important it is as we look at families in different cultures. How does a culture value their elders? When a senior is no longer maintaining a full-time job, do they move aside, which is what we see in Western cultures? Or do elders continue to play a significant role in the community? In the West, we ask each other, what's your job? And then when we have a job, we've got to get the job done. For global South people, it's first drinking tea and then the business, if you ever get to the business. Personal relationships are essential, irrespective of one's job. In fact, in some cultures, job would be very much secondary or even further down the road. Let's talk about time. This is an issue that often comes up in multicultural teams and is the topic of lots of different jokes. For hot climate cultures, people are important, much more important than efficiency and being on time. And so we can adjust the time because it's important that I'm here with this person right now. This person is important. For cultures in the West, time and efficiency are very important. And so also the time is important for the person that is waiting for me. So I got to get there on time for his sake as well. And so when we've set a time for an event or a meeting, it is simply assumed that everyone respects that time because we respect the people who live by that time. Now, this can often cause misunderstanding and frustration in international teams. What about conflicts? How do we best handle conflicts? Now, conflict resolution is a challenge in any setting. How much more in cross-cultural settings? Some cultures say we need to just face the conflict head on and just deal with it. While other cultures, it seems like they're trying to avoid the problem. But perhaps they're using different means for arriving at the same result. So what have you experienced with conflicts and resolving conflicts across cultures? So here we have these two rooms. On the one side, we have the cold climate cultures, and the other, we have the hot climate cultures, two rooms. And so on the one side, the cold climate, which I have generalized as Westerners, people emphasize the individual. People say we need to have a job and then get the job done. We need to speak the facts or the truth. People are time conscious. People emphasize structure and order. People would sooner eat out in a restaurant than in each other's homes. And generally, people have a more secular outlook on life. Now, on the other side, we have the hot climate cultures, which I've generalized as the global South. And here people emphasize the community, the group. People are relational. People talk in a way that everyone feels good. People value the event more than the clock. And everyone says, let's just be flexible. Hospitality is a key value. And in general, people in the global South have a more spiritual outlook. They would be more God conscious. And of course, I've said this and I'll say it again, these are huge generalizations. There are hundreds of cultures within the large cold climate room and the hot climate room. So as we observe these two general rooms, what are we going to do? Do we stay in our own room? Of course, that's the most comfortable. But in cultural intelligence, we learn to appreciate the other room. And then we learn to enter that room and also open our doors for others to enter our room. Yeah, we all come from our specific rooms. We don't deny that. But now as we experience international teams, multicultural churches, and a much more globalized world, how can we work together in positive ways? So here's a few questions that I'd like us to just ponder about. Which room would you consider to be your comfort room? Hot climate room or the cold climate room? Or maybe somewhere in between? As I described these different rooms and compared them, was there anything that surprised you or that was strange or even uncomfortable for you? Now, what about the differences between these rooms? Was there something that was of special interest for you that you'd like to learn more about? And this is what we're going to explore in our course on cultural intelligence. In each module, I'll take one specific issue and explore that in detail.